What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that not only promises but delivers on bringing you the very best guests in all of true crime. Of course, as you know, if you are true crime fans, it is week 2 of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial, and I still have a Ricola in my mouth, so I pardon the look. It looks like I'm chewing tobacco. I promise you I'm not. As we know by now, each side delivered opening statements, and more witnesses are taking the stand today. It was actually just one, a very important one, with some graphic testimony. The trial of the so called Doomsday Mom is the wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, who becomes involved in the deaths of as many as 5 people, including her own children. Today's best guest, before we get going, has a special thank you from my lovely mother right here to Lori Hellis. Lori Hellis was sweet and kind enough to send my mother a card, and my mother was elated because of my father's passing and says it meant a great deal to her. So, Lori, we are very grateful and thankful to have such kind, not only best guests, but hashtag kind guests. Of course, Lori Hellis is an author and a retired criminal defense attorney who has a blog and is currently writing a book about Lori Vallow Daybell, which might be a very long book. She's actually in Boise right now to attend and write about the trials, and says she wants to understand the perfect storm of people and circumstances that culminated in this very tragic and sad ending of a story, which is not completely over yet. Greg Scortis, you know the face because he was on last night. He was so good. We're having him back. He was a Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He's practiced law since 1982, began his career at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association, representing indigent defendants in criminal matters. He's done it all. He teaches law as well, and had some critiques of the opening statements. Dr. Tracy Pearson, also an attorney, brings almost 2 decades of experience defending complex legal matters on behalf of litigants in state and federal court. She's appeared on everything, Dr. Phil, a bazillion other high-profile shows, and she's later tonight going to be on John Fugelsang's Tell Me Everything on Sirius XM Progress 127. And last but certainly not least, matching in green with the good Lori, is Anjanette Levy. She's a correspondent and host for the Law and Crime Network. She's covered a lot of high-profile criminal cases like Alec Murdaugh, where we met her in both state and federal courts. She's worked on the Stephen Avery case, as well as Kyle Rittenhouse and the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. So welcome to one and all. It was a wild day in court today. Before we get there, please follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter. We're at Podcast STS. You can join us as a YouTube member or subscribe on Patreon if you like the work that we do. Without further ado, to the good Lori in green. Describe court today. What was it like?
It was an interesting day. Anyone who had watched the preliminary hearing for Chad Daybell had heard quite a bit of this information before. This was Detective Ray Hermosillo, and he was the lead detective from the city of Rexburg. And so he was on to give an overview of the case. So he started out in the morning with the beginning of the case, and before lunch got to the point where they had discovered the bodies of the children in Chad Daybell's backyard, and began with the descriptions of how J.J. Vallow's body was found, what it was like when they pulled it out of the ground, discussed what the condition of Tylee Ryan's body, which was awful. And so at that point, the judge then said, let's have a break for lunch so that we can come back and have caught our breaths a bit before we launch back into some really graphic autopsy photos. So we came back from lunch, and there was definitely a flutter going on. The prosecution came in and out, and there was clearly there was something going on. Lori's attorneys asked to meet with her because she had just been brought up from the basement where the holding cells are, and they wanted time to talk to her. So they took a 30-minute recess while they talked to her. There was a lot more fluttering around, prosecutors in and out, and the upshot was that then he came back. They all came back into court. The judge said there is a motion that the defense wants to make. So Lori's attorney stood up and said, "We want her to be able to leave the courtroom. She wants to waive her appearance for the afternoon so she didn't have to be there while all the graphic autopsy photos were being shown, because the photos in the morning had upset her." So they went on about how fragile her mental health state is, and the judge took it up. Everybody done a little bit of research in the 30 minutes or so they had while they were conferencing. And the judge basically said, no, the state has a right to have her present. He didn't say the victims also have a right to have her present, but that is true, actually. And so he ruled against her, and she had to stay in the courtroom. I suspect they had given her something to calm her down, because then she came in and about the last half hour of court fell asleep. So, but she was awake and alert and attempting to avoid looking at some of the more graphic photos after lunch.
And I will read Good Lori's tweet from precisely 3 p.m. because I do my homework. She wrote, "Lori appears to be asleep. Remember, she's on a cocktail of psychotropics. If she was very upset this morning, she may have been given something to calm her anxiety. Nonetheless, it's not a good look." Greg, to you, did you catch her sleeping as well? And then we're going to go back in reverse and kind of go through what got her to that point where maybe she was medicated to get through this afternoon of some graphic testimony. But did you see her asleep around 3 p.m.?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the general impression that everyone had. And we really went through, and Lori did a good job of this, a series of different Loris today. She was in the morning session, she was more animated than ever. She was interacting with her attorneys. She was a little bit chummy, it seemed like. She seemed sort of happy. And then they started showing pictures. And importantly, her brother-in-law was there. Is it Ray? Anyway, he was literally glaring at her. I mean, this man was, it was Kay Woodcock's husband, the woman.
Oh, Larry.
Yeah,
Larry.
Larry Woodcock was there, and he was making eye contact with her. I don't know whether everybody saw this, but he even said at the beginning, "I just want to look her in the eye." At some point, she no longer was apparently willing to make eye contact with him. Then they started showing the pictures. Larry and Kay were obviously very, very upset with that. Lori didn't seem to be sort of reacting a whole lot. Obviously, it was troubling to her. And then, as your Lori said, the good Lori, we come back after the break. And what was really unusual, Joel, is that we all were being told there's a deal, there's a plea bargain. She's about to change her plea. And there was this, I mean, of course, there's always rumors like that, but it was like she's trying to cut a deal. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, never mind. She just wants to leave. She doesn't want to be there anymore. And the judge, I think, made the correct decision on behalf of the jury as much as anyone else, that said, no, you're the defendant here. You need to be here. We're going to keep you present, and we're going to keep you for the rest of the trial. And then Lori sort of zombied out for the rest of the afternoon after the first afternoon break, the long afternoon break.
And Dr. Pearson, I'm a kind of a cynic by nature. Was there something bigger at play here, possibly? We talked just yesterday. I was asking Greg, could you be ruled incompetent once a trial begins, which is possible? Is this some sort of possible tactic, or was this real emotion? I know there are no cameras, and only Lori and Greg were in the courtroom. But from the reporting that you're seeing, does this appear to be a genuine meltdown? And again, we'll get more in depth on what happened in just a moment. Or does it seem to be some sort of legal shenanigans going on where they're setting something up for a possible incompetency to stand trial?
I think that she has obviously been found incompetent to stand trial previously and then restored. It's called restorable. Are you restorable? And this attorney has been practicing for a very, very long time, has been court appointed in many, many cases, as he's pointed out to the jury. And I think that you have to be willing to, as an attorney, that this is the one that would ruin your credibility for life if you were playing games. He seems to be fairly well respected by the court, at least, for the fact that he's being appointed to these cases. And that's something you need to look at. For me, I think that what we're dealing with is somebody who is difficult to manage, at the very least. When you look at the opening statement, and I'm just going to pause for a second and say that there was a tell that I heard in that opening statement by the defense, which is that they don't have enough evidence. It wasn't she didn't do it. And as a lawyer, ethically, you can't make an argument that your client didn't do something if you are aware that they did. That would be lying to the court, and you're not allowed to do that. So that's something that's weighing in the back of my mind when I hear about the conduct. And so it sounds to me like she's a very difficult client to control, that she has a serious mental health issue that they're trying to manage, and they're trying to keep the trial going while preserving her best ability to seek a not guilty verdict without putting their own ethics and their own licenses on the line.
And Dr. Pearson, is the implication there that they, meaning her defense team, believe that she is guilty or may have told them that she did something, and so they're just arguing that there's not enough evidence? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, when you're a defense lawyer, if you know that your client is guilty, has done the crime, then you cannot argue that they haven't. That is an absolute no-no. That would get you in trouble with the bar. And I have had that experience where I have said to clients, I want to know so I know what my range of options are here. Other lawyers play the approach of, I don't want to know, so I don't foreclose any options. But when he made that argument, it suggested to me, when he said there wasn't enough evidence, the enough was a kicker, but there wasn't enough evidence, that he wasn't saying she didn't do it. He was basically standing in the place of us and the Constitution, making the system follow the law, follow the process, and making sure they prove each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt for that jury.
And Mabel Quintanilla, a friend of the show who watches us in El Salvador. Hello, STS Nation. And Joel, today has been heartbreaking, and I've been only reading tweets. I cannot even imagine being a family member where, well, as we were just talking about, so Larry Woodcock was there from the get-go today. Kay Woodcock only came in the latter half of the day. Apparently, Larry was sobbing at one point, and I think Kay broke down as well because there was some really graphic testimony and photos. And again, if you have a weak stomach, you might want to tune out today, although we want you here, but we're going to talk about some of that. And then here, Marcella writes, she's a great actress, meaning the bad Lori, not the good Lori, of course. And Jeanette, yesterday we talked about Alec Murdaugh and some similarities. I'm just curious, from your work on Law and Crime, what's the appetite like for the Lori Vallow trial compared to, let's say, Alec Murdaugh? Is the hunger as great as it was for that trial from what you're seeing?
Well, I think people are incredibly interested in it. I think there is an appetite for it. It's unfortunate that cameras were not allowed because I think that you would see a lot more interest in the trial gaining more steam as far as viewers go, or interest, I should say, if cameras had been permitted, which I really think is doing a disservice. I understand their concern, the Judge Boyce's concern, and the prosecution and the defense. They don't want to do this trial more than once, should there be a conviction. But you can still have a fair trial with a camera in the courtroom. And I think that a good remedy to that would have been, maybe not having cameras pre-trial, but allowing the cameras once opening statements began. It's a little harder with this to gauge since the audio is being released in the beginning of the day. But I know that from some of the tweets I've seen, and when I tweeted kind of my opinion about Judge Boyce's ruling regarding Lori Vallow Daybell wanting to waive her appearance, I thought it was the proper decision. As a defendant in a triple, you're charged with 3 counts of murder, or at least being a part of a murder with conspiracy as part of this. Can you imagine letting a defendant go out of the room? It's different if they're removed because they're not behaving. But being able to just say, I need to waive my appearance for this portion because I'm seeing my children's autopsy photos and crime scene photos of their bodies. I think there would be a lot more interest if it had been televised, but I still think there is a good amount of interest. The Alec Murdaugh case, there was a lot of interest because of the documentaries and just all of the twists and turns in that case. And the fact that once the double homicides happened, you had all of these financial crimes cases coming to light, and the specter of all of these other deaths around the family, and that gained steam over time as people found out about the case being televised. So we may see the same thing with this. It's just more difficult because of the circumstances.
And there's no doubt that the lack of cameras is a factor in all that. Madeline Bullitt writes, while you're watching, just go ahead and hit that like button. You're going to like it. I like that. Catherine says, aloha. She's in Hawaii. Century Combustion. Hello from Boulder, Colorado. Hello from Michigan. Hello from London. So STS Nation is here in full force. Greg, to you, what kind of problem is it to manage, as Dr. Pearson said, a client like Lori Vallow? You're sitting there in a public courtroom in a very public setting, and she has a very difficult time looking at these photos and basically throws, in effect, a tantrum, and you've got to deal with it. You've got to deal with the state. You got to deal with the judge. What are these defense attorneys saying to themselves privately?
Oh, it's even what they're saying to the media publicly after the court let out yesterday. They came out and said, "Hey, we tried to plea bargain this case," or something like that, which is a highly questionable thing to say in the middle of a trial. But I think Lori's been a handful for them. She's been declared incompetent twice. I think she's been restored twice now. She probably is difficult to work with. I doubt that she's been very forthcoming on a lot of issues. She's probably scared to be real forthcoming for a lot of the reasons that Dr. Pearson mentioned, and probably just I can't imagine that she's not really difficult. Although there seems to be some, I don't know that chemistry is the right word, but they do seem to be bantering among themselves, and the lawyers will peer over to her and talk to her, and she'll talk to them, and they'll hand each other papers and things like that. So, and whether that's a show, and we've all sort of been part of that, where you try to humanize your client by not really giving them noogies, but just talking to them during the trial and maybe touching them or something like that, so that the jury thinks, well, gee, if you're not afraid of them, why should we be? I mean, there's this body language you try to do during the trial, and I think the attorneys are trying to do that with a client who's not necessarily reciprocating very well and making their jobs difficult. And they kind of said that the lead attorney in his opening remarks almost hinted that, hey, 99 cases out of 100 plea bargain, but every once in a while you just got to take one to the mat, and it was almost apologetic to the jury that, hey, here we are. And then, like I said, afterwards he walks out of the court and says, hey, we tried to settle this case, but the state wouldn't do it. No, I'm sure she's a handful, and I do think these defense attorneys are doing a fairly good job with what they've got.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you want to admit to the media that early on, at least. Dawn Shackelford writes, looking forward to hearing the good Lori's opinion today, which you're about to hear, followed by, I heard Archibald for the first time today, Jim Archibald. Is it me, Lori, or does he have a weird speaking cadence? Does he have a weird speaking cadence?
he does have an interesting cadence. I think it changes depending on how it almost sounds like maybe he had a childhood stutter or something, because he if he's thinking really deeply, you get some stranger sort of cadences. And of course, I'm thinking about how I sound now that I'm talking about that. But yeah, he does. I was interested in the fact that he hasn't done a lot of the questioning. He did the opening statement, and then John Thomas has been doing most of the other work, giving objections and doing all those sorts of things. So yeah, it was very clear before the lunch break that Lori's demeanor changed. She was sitting with her arms crossed. She had her head down. She was not really making eye contact with people. I do know that at one point today she made sort of prolonged eye contact both with Larry and with Larry and Kay's daughter Kresha. And I think in both cases they kind of stared her down. So I'm sure that was upsetting too. And then she was clearly upset going into lunch.
She was sitting, but this is the first description of her this morning, that she's sitting between her attorneys, dressed in a pink blouse. She's wearing black rimmed glasses, smiling, very chatty with Jim Archibald and John Thomas. That obviously changed as the day progressed. Dr. Pearson, to you, we've talked about this before, but how important is the image that she is projecting? And clearly people in the courtroom, as Lori described it, knew something was going on around 1 or so in the afternoon, 1:30 maybe. How important is it to project an image and a proper image to not only the court, but obviously the jurors?
It's critical. Jurors have nothing to do but sit there. They are sitting there and watching, and they see every single thing that goes on. And you're sitting there for hours. You're taking notes, maybe. You might have water sitting there. I think that they have notebooks and a bottle of water. And that's it. So you're looking at the judge, you're looking at the prosecutor, and you're looking at the person of the moment. And I think that it is critical for her to put on a solid image that is persuasive. The human mind puts things into buckets, and those buckets have different meanings to different people. And that's what we call implicit bias. And so even if the jurors are not overtly judging her in the moment, they are implicitly judging her. And those thoughts that they're unaware of, those unconscious thoughts, will have an impact when they deliberate. If she doesn't look alert, that'll impact them. If she doesn't look engaged, that'll impact them. You're also dealing with a client you have to keep your client engaged. And I've sat there with clients next to me, and you have to have somebody to help manage them if you're doing a big trial like this, because inevitably they're tugging on your arm and you're trying to listen to figure out, should you object in that moment? And I have told clients here, write it down, because I have to think of 6 million things at one time and respond instantaneously, or I miss my opportunity, and that means I hurt you. So there's that going on, plus the mental health piece, plus the fact that considering all things being equal, she's scared. She's concerned. There's an audience, behind her. She's got a guy in a black dress sitting behind a bench. She's going to be making some decisions. She's got a bunch of people who don't like her at another table. And so you have to engage this person and keep them occupied. If you recall back and this is a separate case, but a civil case, Johnny Depp, they had gummy bears on the table. They were trying to keep him engaged. He was drawing pictures. He's trying to keep his mind working. Well, and the same thing goes with criminal defendants. They're dealing with things that are of much larger gravity, frankly, than Johnny Depp was by comparison. But yes, it's absolutely necessary for her to put on the correct image, whatever that is.
And one of the best names, Shaquille Oatmeal, is saying hello, along with Marina, who's joining us from the south of Spain. Buenas noches from Spain at 1 a.m. local. Love our community. Love you back, Marina. And I'm glad you're staying up late. But you guys have siestas in Spain, so you took a long nap today. So I expect you to be here. And Jeanette, you're somewhere right now, precisely where I don't know. But next week you're going to Boise next week, and you're filling in for the inimitable Gigi McKelvey of Pretty Lies and Alibis, who's been all over this. Number one, are you excited to go? And number two, what kind of challenge is it for the media? I understand you guys are having to basically pick a lot, put in for a lottery every evening and hope that you get picked. So
Right.
how frustrating is that for you from a media standpoint?
And I'll be providing a little bit of relief to Gigi, who I consider the foremost expert on this. She, has schooled me quite a bit on it, and I've followed it somewhat. But I'm interested to go. This case, bothers me on a number of levels. I'm just going to be honest with you. Cases where children have been harmed, really, I find to be quite upsetting. It doesn't mean I can't cover them and kind of, put that wall up. But this is, just if her attorneys tried to plea bargain this out, that was very smart of them, because I don't know how you go into court and explain how your client doesn't help find her children when the whole nation is looking for them, and you seem to not have a care in the world. So it is going to be very challenging when we get there, and it has been challenging right now. I mean, in just planning to cover this, having to go take some extra steps, getting the sketch artist and things like that. So I'll be interested to kind of observe her myself, since the last time any of us saw her on a television camera and on a feed was the time it was right after her competency had been restored, and she appeared to be kind of very smiley in court and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see how she's kind of reacting. I was a little surprised by this whole attempting to waive her appearance today. I was shocked by that, because you would think that the defense attorneys, and maybe they have done that maybe they have talked to her about how she's supposed to be behaving in the appropriate ways, the appropriate reactions, and how she should be carrying herself in court. So it is going to be a challenge, and just trying to get a seat in the courtroom. Maybe it will be not as difficult next week, since we'll be in week 3, but we'll have to wait and see, because this is one of those where you kind of have to be there to cover it. If it were on television, we wouldn't necessarily have to be there.
Julie Frew from the UK says, hello, STS Nation. What's up, baby doll? STS Nation. We've got the Windy City, Frankie Figs, who holds a special place in STS Nation's heart. Very thoughtful after the passing of my father. Lori, good Lori to you. We've got Idaho in the house, too, a town I have not heard of. Kuna, Idaho, Diane
Hi,
O'Brien.
Diane.
Oh, there you go. She knows Lori, and Lori knows her. So hello,
Indeed.
Diane. Lori, what's it like? Is it surreal for you? Because you've been so heavily invested in this case, even moving to Boise to write a book about it, picking up and leaving your beautiful home. I saw a photo of that working space you had in Arizona. I don't know that I would have given that up, but you did. So what's it like for you now that you're actually in this courtroom, seeing the people that you know, like the Larry and Kay Woodcocks and Lori Vallow right in front of you, participating in this real life drama right before your eyes?
Well, it has been a little bit surreal, because it's been such a long time coming between Lori being incompetent and having 10 months of restorative treatment and COVID. This case has taken an inordinate amount of time to get to trial. So it does seem a little bit surreal. But yeah, I moved to Boise about a year ago in order to cover the case. So, and I left my beautiful home in the Phoenix area with my my outdoor patio office. And yeah, I miss it, especially now when the weather's so dreary here. Joel, I did want to say that I thought it was interesting to observe how the jury was responding to Lori when throughout the day. I think they were a bit impatient with her when we were waiting for this to start. Now, the motion for her to waive her appearance was done outside their presence. So they didn't know that she was trying to waive her appearance, but they did appear sort of impatient that things had taken so long to get started after lunch. I also thought the interesting thing was that when these really hard images were, and let's remember that these are being shown to the entire courtroom. This is not like Murdoch where they were covering screens and doing all those things. These are projected on a screen and behind the witness stand, and they're also being projected into the overflow space. So anyone who has a ticket to get into the courthouse is seeing these images, and some of them were hard to see. And it was really interesting to see the jury's reaction. Many of them were teared up, men and women. Many of them, when some of the images of JJ were shown, were teared up. And there were a lot of them that were really shooting daggers her way, that were pretty angry looks on their faces as they were looking at her. So, and you're right, Larry Woodcock sat in the back and just kind of sobbed as quietly as he could. Kay came in and then was told that Lori was trying to waive her appearance, and before the images came up, she left again. So, but it was a rough morning rough afternoon for the whole family.
And how about the rest of the courtroom? The people in there who are not the jurors. Any audible gasps or crying from other people, sniffling, tissues?
Yes. Time after time, as court starts, court security tells us no cheering, no talking, no audible reactions. But it was difficult. There were audible reactions to some of the photos that were put up.
And Dr. Pearson, to you, since you're the doctor, how traumatic can that be, especially for a juror who's often just a lay person off the street making $10 a day, has a job at a fast food restaurant, or it could be an optometrist, you don't know. But how jarring and traumatic is it to see these images that are horrific, that could stay with you potentially for a lifetime? And by the way, Christina writes, I think the bad Lori, is the one who killed JJ. And it sounds from like what Lori was saying, maybe some jurors already have their mind made up. But how traumatic is it, Dr. Pearson?
It's very traumatic. In many states, and I'm not sure about Idaho, they provide the opportunity for post jury service counseling if you want it. And it is very traumatic. It's vicarious trauma that you experience by experiencing these images. And it does stay with them for a lifetime. And when you think about jury service, it's mandatory unless you're excused. It's a constitutional duty, a constitutional right, depending on how you think about it. And it's the hallmark of our legal system that we are judged by a jury of our peers. And so it is in one way a very positive thing. In another way, we ask these people to take on the weight and gravity and horror of the things that people do to each other in this world, and they carry it with them for a lifetime. And so some states, as I said, don't have that post-jury service therapeutic option. I'm hopeful that they do here. But you hear stories about jurors post-trial, and it's even worse when the jurors get attacked post-trial for the decision that they made.
Sonia says, hello, girls from Quebec, Canada. There's some boys on this panel as well, so Greg and I won't be too offended. Greg, how was it for you? You're a manly man. You're a avid cyclist. Ran for attorney general. You've seen a lot. What was it like for you to see these photos?
I don't know, Joel. I think that after 41 years of this, you it's almost like you're watching a movie. It's almost like you're watching a documentary or something. It doesn't bother me at all. I've been to, when I was at the DA's office, I went to so many homicide scenes where you're not really looking at photos, you're looking at bodies. And I think most everybody on this panel has had to see some of that. And we become used to it. You don't ever really get too used to it. It's always troubling when you're, talking to someone and you're standing close to a dead body, and then to look at these pictures. But what was really troubling about the pictures, and I think that it's been spelled out pretty well today, was that they were children. And no matter how you look at a picture of a dead body, when you look at a child, and then you have that child's mother sitting, 30 feet from the where the picture is being displayed, and you have to think what's going through her mind. And that's why I think people wanted to look at her and like, hey, if it's bugging me on the jury, what's mommy thinking at this minute? And if she's not as troubled as I am, what's wrong with this picture? And it's really a kind of a dichotomy that we go through, where and the judge has to weigh the probative value of the photographs against their risk of prejudice and undue prejudice. We don't want to inflame the jury, but on the other hand, picture's worth 1,000 words, and at some point they're admissible, they're appropriate, and they're part of the overall picture that the state's trying to paint. And so they're troubling, but to me, you don't look at them that way. If you do, you go crazy. You couldn't do this job very long.
And I was going to get into some of the meat and potatoes, which we will in a moment, but I spotted this comment from Carrie G. Opening statement, Dr. Pearson. The inflection of the defense projected zero confidence in the innocence of Lori Vallow Daybell. He sounded like he'd rather be getting a vasectomy, sans local anesthetic, than represent her. Us men can relate to that. Would not be comfortable. It's not a good sign that someone who's listening, I presume Carrie listened to the audio, but the jurors are there. And Greg was already talking about how they're basically throwing their hands up in the air after court yesterday to the media. Doesn't bode very well at this point in the trial to be hearing this for Lori Vallow, does it?
Well, it all depends. Now, remember, we're telling jurors, don't form an opinion until you've heard all the evidence, and don't discuss it, and don't watch anything, and don't read anything. And that's not the same thing for the folks that watch this program. And so they are free to have the opinions that they want to have, and they are free to express those. Again, I think that defendants are screwed if they do and screwed if they don't. I'll be blunt. If you cry, you're guilty. You feel bad and you feel remorse. If you don't cry, like Pam Smart did back in New Hampshire back in the day, if folks remember that trial, then you're the ice queen. There really is no right way to behave. And that is a fundamental problem with our legal system, in that our jurors, frankly, don't get training in how to mitigate that bias. And how does a defendant behave? I don't know. I told my clients to sit there, be quiet, look engaged, don't bother me, write down what you need me to know. I'll look at it. If it's a crisis, okay, interrupt me, but otherwise, don't draw attention. That's the best thing that you can do, is not draw attention to yourself. But again, the jurors are sitting there and they're seeing everything.
Fofa Cat writes, 100% best guess here tonight. What a stacked panel. Makes it a little tougher for me because I've got to go around the horn and make sure everyone is getting their due time, because I have so much to offer. Anjanette, I hope I'm not about to put my foot in my mouth, but you mentioned this off the top about how it's very difficult, particularly because it's young children. Are you a mother? I think you're a mother.
I am, and of one. And so, I think about JJ, who was 7, and my little one's about to turn 8. And yeah, so I mean, cases with kids are always, I think, the worst. They're the ones that bother me. Obviously, a lot of them bother me, but with children, yes, I think it's really difficult. So, yeah, especially JJ, and hearing about the way he was with the duct tape, and I don't understand it. I kind of like want somebody to ask Lori Vallow Daybell. I want her to take the stand so we can hear about this whole theory about zombies, if that's even what she really, really believed. So, yeah, I long answer to your question. I am a mom. I will be covering it. I just this one boggles my mind, much like the Letitia Stout one does too. So,
yeah. And by the way, speaking of these photos of JJ and Ty Lee, every week, every Friday, it is time for your True Crime Phil with Phil Waters. He's a Houston homicide detective. He investigated more than 400 homicides. He is the real life Magnum PI, drives an old Ferrari, wears Hawaiian shirts, spends half the year in Hawaii. He's one of the coolest guys I've ever met. And he didn't break down, but after all these homicides, he says still the thing that sticks with him 40 years later are the pictures of babies and kids. And he had even if it wasn't a homicide, but a baby was discovered dead at a residence, the homicide unit would still go out in Houston. And, he started to tear up. So even the most hardened and seasoned detectives are dealing with that sort of emotion when they are looking at these photos of children. Jimmy C is a friend of the show, and he writes, Lori, I'm going to have you take this. Why are Chad's kids so much more deserving to live than Lori's kids? I never understood why they were treated differently because they were older. Will any of Chad's kids testify in this case?
Well, the answer is because they weren't in the way. I think one of the interesting things that came out of opening statements was the prosecutor telling the story of how Alex Cox was setting up Lori's internet router. And he used as the password, too many kids. And when he sent it to her in a text and told her what it was, her answer was funny. So I think that the short answer is because they weren't in the way. I do believe that at least one of Chad's children is on the prosecution's witness list. He testified at the grand jury, and I think that has to do with Tammy's death and the circumstances surrounding her death. So, but it is interesting that there is absolutely no one in the courtroom for Lori. All of the family that are there in support of Kay and Larry, and Annie Cushing is there with her daughter. Annie Cushing is Tylee's aunt, Joe Ryan's sister, and but there's no one in the courtroom there to support Lori.
And Jeannie with a kind note, good afternoon. I'm glad to see the show back. Our thoughts and prayers have been with you and your family. Thanks so much, Jeannie. Someone mentioned taking the stand. I don't know if it was Anjanette or Lori, but someone said it, so now I've got to ask it. I'm going to go around the horn, starting with Lori. Lori, does Lori Vallow Daybell, LVD, take the stand in this trial?
I don't think she does. I think that she is a compliant enough woman that she will not. Her attorneys are going to advise her not to, and she's going to follow their advice. I do have to say that I have a pound of Starbucks coffee riding on this because one of my followers says she will take the stand. So,
and Lori, just remind everyone the name of your podcast. Your blog is the Lori Vallow Story, but what is your podcast?
The YouTube channel is called Children of Darkness and Light, which is the name of my book.
And you better check that out. No one knows this case like Lori.
September of 24.
September of 24. There you go. There you go. Greg, does she take the stand?
I'll say this. When they were selecting the jury, it was interesting because the defense team asked a lot of the venire, a lot of the people that were being questioned, whether or not they would have expected in a case like this for the defendant to testify. And that often signals to me that they're considering not having her testify. I think Lori may want to testify. I think she'll be a horrible witness. I mean, I was a prosecutor for 8 years, and you would live for moments like Lori Vallow to take the stand so you can cross-examine her. I know that sounds awful, but I don't think she'll withstand very much on cross-examination because she can't help herself. And so I do think the defense is going to try to talk her out of it. It's her decision. It's her decision 100%, but she'll follow the advice of her attorneys probably. And who knows where she's going to be. I mean, that's not even a decision that the defense is going to make until they're through with all their witnesses and the state has put on all their witnesses. If you follow most criminal defense trials, the defendant is usually the last person to testify in the defense's case. And the state can't call her, so she's not going to testify for the government. And so I think, I know I haven't answered the question very well. My money's with Lori, good Lori, that I'd probably be on that Starbucks pound of coffee side of yours. But I don't think she does. I think it'd be foolish for her to. But I'm not sure there haven't been some foolish decisions made in this case already.
And there might be some highly caffeinated lawyers soon. Barbie Rice writes, Dr. Pearson, is it possible that since it was reported that Lori showed no emotional response during court before lunch, is it possible her attorney suggested she show some emotion after lunch, thus the act? That might be even a little cynical from me. And you can answer that. And also, do you think she takes a stand or not?
I think that it would be highly inappropriate for a lawyer to coach a client to act. I think that Lori is behaving the way Lori is behaving in the moment. These lawyers have too much on their mind to be trying to get her to behave in a very particular way, other than please don't draw attention to yourself. As far as whether she takes the stand or not, again, my position is that I think they know that she committed the crime based on a tell that was contained in that opening statement. And because otherwise the lawyer would be arguing she hadn't done it. And that's a bias on my part based on practicing for so many years. But when it comes to taking the stand, if they are aware that she did commit the crime or these crimes or one of these crimes, then they can't put her up there if they think she's going to lie. Yet it is her decision to testify, and it is hers alone. And so I have actually done this, where I've had a client go against my advice and take the stand. And what you do is you say, Judge, can you swear in the witness? Because I can't do it. And you don't say that part. And then you say, what is it that you'd like to tell the court? And you sit down. Because you can't facilitate the questioning of your client, because you would be suborning perjury. So I think that if they have control of their client, she won't testify. I could see a situation where you might sandwich a defendant between other witnesses, so they weren't the last word and they weren't the first word, in hopes to mitigate what damage she might be doing to her own case and end with a better witness. But it sounds like what I'm hearing in the reporting is that they aren't planning on calling many witnesses. And so it may be that they simply rest. And she doesn't take the stand if they have good control.
Chico's mummy writes, so basically she hasn't looked at all the evidence they have against her until now. I think the presumption there is that she broke down by seeing these photos for the first time. Dawn writes, glad she had to stay and see the results of her actions and inaction. No one wanted to see the photos. She could have prevented them, ultimately. And then obviously a very nice gesture from Courtney. We appreciate that and thank you. And Jeanette, you and I are not attorneys here, but we play them on TV. And what do you think? Do you think she takes the stand? And obviously, if she were to take the stand, I think it would heighten the interest in the case that much more, right?
It would probably heighten the interest a lot. I've been going back and forth on this quite a bit because part of me feels like after watching how she acted in the interview room after Charles Vallow was shot, and she was in there and talking with the police, and there's been this discussion about how she knows how to work the police. She didn't say that to them, but she apparently had said that to somebody else. So part of me thought, she may get up there. She may insist on getting up there and thinking she has something to offer, that she can talk her way out of this. But at the same time, there may be periods of time where she is going back and forth. Maybe she feels nothing in the morning session and then she feels something in the afternoon. So I don't know. A couple of weeks ago, I thought she definitely would want to get up there and try to win this herself, or she thought she could maybe talk her way out of it, but maybe not now. I don't know. I mean, if she took the stand, I would just kind of love for her I would like to hear some sort of explanation from her, because it sounds like, and I know we're only in week 2 now, but we're in the second day of the state's case. I mean, if the lawyers are shooting daggers at her, or the jurors, some of them are shooting daggers at her, as we just heard a little bit ago. I don't know. What does she have to lose if she gets up there?
Back pain forever. I can relate to that name. She shouldn't be allowed medication for court. You should be for back pain. Jeannie Wayne back in saying, if you can't deal with the pressure, don't murder your kids. That is about the smartest, most succinct statement you can make. Followed by Christina here. And this is a sentiment I think so many people have. I just cannot wrap my mind around Tylee. How? How can you even discuss, let alone participate, or worse, do it herself to a child you gave life and birth to? I just don't understand. So sad. You don't have to look too far back in the past with Alec Murdaugh murdering his own son. I have a son. It's, to use a news cliche, unthinkable, but it happens. And sadly, it's been happening since the beginning of time, where people kill members of their own family, even their own children. 8:48 a.m. local time, a gentleman named Detective Ray Hermosillo from Rexburg, Idaho, is sworn in. This exchange really, I don't know, perked my ears up, and I even made it the quote on the thumbnail today. He did a welfare check, the detective, and he was basically on the stand, I think, the entirety of the day. He says that Alex looked at him with a blank look when he did a welfare check on JJ. He looked scared, and then Alex looked at Chad. Chad and Alex did not say anything. Hermosillo became suspicious, and he again asked Alex where JJ was. Alex said JJ was with Kay in Louisiana, and Hermosillo said that wasn't possible, as Kay was the one who asked for the welfare check. So it was kind of a deer caught in headlights. Lori, to you, how important is this witness? Did they bring him up at the right time? And what sort of impact did Detective Hermosillo have today?
Well, Ray Hermosillo is a very important witness to this case. He basically is the detective who has overseen the whole case, and really he's the guy who puts all the puzzle pieces together. It's interesting because you can tell he's very emotionally invested in the case, has been all along. I do think that they put him on at the right time, because now that there is sort of this overarching story about the chronology of things, now we're going to see them dive into really some granular stuff, more things about text messages between this person and that person. We're going to see a lot more digital information. So I think it was important to put him on now to sort of give the jurors hooks to hang that stuff on, now that that more detailed stuff's coming out.
And Greg, back to you. The detective talks about a few search warrants in Rexburg for one of the apartments. There were 3 different apartments that they executed search warrants on. They find a rental agreement for a storage unit. That was an apartment 175. And in that apartment, they find some of JJ's toys and items belonging to him. And Detective Hermosillo says there were things of that nature in the garage that caught our eye. And he continues to talk, and says around 9:30, normally when people go on trips and plan to come home, they don't take all their belongings from their closet. This caught our attention because there was nothing in the closet other than empty hangers. So this is clearly a line of questioning where the state is building, one domino on top of the other domino on top of the other domino. Because we talked maybe that their opening statements were a little weak, but are they on the right track right now in terms of providing the necessary evidence for a conviction down the road here?
I think so. And yesterday, if you recall, Joel, I was a little bit critical of the state for putting on Kay and Brandon Boudreaux because I thought they were both a little bit nervous, kind of weak. And I thought, boy, you're coming out of the chute with two witnesses who are so, and they're sensitive. And I don't mean to say anything disparaging because they both have been through a horrible situation here. But then when you put Hermosillo on, he tied what they said together, and that was really effective. So it made me think that the state's decision to put Kay and Brandon on yesterday actually was pretty smart because they're looking for these children. They're the ones that are putting out the feelers, and all of a sudden he's in and he's following up on this missing person thing, and he goes in and he executes these search warrants. And you talked about things that he found and things that he didn't find. He also found JJ's medication. I mean, that I think was a big thing to think about. That, I mean, if you're taking your kids somewhere, and we heard from Kay early on all the problems JJ had with his early life, his early development, the reason why he was adopted. He was born with some issues. I mean, this kid had some struggles, and people loved him, people embraced him. And Kay even said, I thought Lori and Chad were the perfect parents for him. And she talked about how great they were. They seemed like the happy couple. And then you start going through these search warrants and you finding things. And I think that the state is doing a good job now, given that foundation that Kay and Brandon laid yesterday with Hermosillo talking about what he found in these various search warrants. And they were getting, from this house to this storage unit to this house, and everything was sort of piling up against Lori Vallow Daybell.
Lauren Brown writes, "Hi, SCS Nation, and hi, the good Lori." I love that. Good Lori, bad Lori. "Do you think even if she knew the kids were dead, she didn't know how? And that would make sense why she was so bothered." Followed by, I love that good Lori is on your panel today from KCL. But back to that first question, is that plausible that she didn't know how and that's why she's so bothered, or implausible in your opinion? And don't forget Julie, who says, "Love man, Jeanette." Lori?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. The reason I say that is because she and Chad Daybell were both in Hawaii telling everyone that they were empty nesters, that they didn't have any children, that Chad Daybell was telling people that Lori's daughter had died the year before. And Lori was right there nodding and confirming. No, I don't think so. I think that Lori knew exactly what happened to her children. I think that she just believed that they were not human when they were murdered. I think she believes that they were zombies, that they were possessed by some evil spirit, and that she was, I think that she believes that she did them a mercy when she participated in them being killed.
If that's the case, I just have to follow up. Should she be in a mental hospital or should she be in a prison?
Well, Joel, this has been one of the seminal questions of this case from the very beginning. And that's the question of, when does a deeply held, fervent religious belief tip itself over into a diagnosable religious delusion? And she's been walking that fine line for quite a while. So, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's a question the jury is going to have to determine.
Dr. Pearson, curious about your thoughts on that question.
I thought it was interesting that they weren't planning on using a mental health defense. And it to me was interesting because that's an issue of strategy. And that is typically left to counsel. That isn't something that the defendant typically gets control over. It's strategy. And given the circumstances, I think that it was a plausible defense. When something like a religious, we'll take the religious piece, tips over into something like that, you're talking basically not cults that aren't dangerous. I mean, you're talking about a cult organization that is damaging, that is dangerous, that you don't feel you can leave, that you're sucked into. There's mind control. There's a great book by Steve Hassan, Dr. Steve Hassan. I recommend everybody read it, on cults and how that all works. And he explains it really well in there. But I think that when it comes down to the legal case, you have to pay attention to, what was their choice? Their choice was not to do that. And it may be that they can't get their client to cooperate in that.
Jessica K writes, and Anjanette, that she could be a juror. And she writes, tweets were tough to read today. I'm angrier than I was yesterday. I can't wrap my head around harming children in such horrific ways. Heartbroken. She sounds a little like the way you were describing things when it comes to young children. Again, someone like Jessica could easily be a juror on there. Do you think that these photographs so early on means it could already be game over for Lori Vallow?
Well, I mean, I do think it's interesting timing that we're in day 2 and we're already seeing this part of the case. I don't know, because if you're looking at the case chronologically, JJ and Tylee's remains weren't found until June of 2020. They were reported missing the fall of 2019. It very well could be. I mean, I guess we just have to wait and see how her defense attorneys question the state's witnesses. I mean, I hate to say that, because I mean, this case could go on for 8 weeks, and everyone's innocent until proven guilty, and everyone's entitled to a fair trial. But I don't see how the defense, any person who has children, or if you've even had a babysitting job before and you're a juror, I don't see how her defense gets over people thinking to themselves, this woman, was responsible for her children. She had a child who had autism, and yet months pass and there are all these stories like he's fine or he's with so-and-so. And I just don't understand. I don't see how her defense team gets past that. Maybe I will change my mind when I get there next week. And maybe there will be something I see in the courtroom that tells me differently, but I don't see how they get over that hurdle, because in this whole thing about if she truly believed they were zombies, if she really is that mentally ill and delusional that she thought she was doing them a service, I don't know. You would think that even if she wouldn't participate, as Tracy suggested, I don't see how you don't, as an attorney, say, look, my client is severely mentally ill. I mean, she obviously has severe mental health issues. It took months to almost a year to restore her competency.
Good point. Good point there. Janice Peace writes, Greg, for you, what is the difference between incompetency and insanity, since they don't have an insanity plea in Idaho? And then I wanted to get your take on something else right after that.
So in this case, that's a good question. And I'll simplify it a little bit, but insanity really relates to their mental state at the time of the crime. Did they appreciate their conduct? And as Anjanette said, if you really think that you're killing a zombie or you're killing this being because you think it's evil, that could be insanity. That could mean that you're not guilty of the crime because you didn't have the mindset to kill a human being. You didn't have the mindset to commit a homicide. But that doesn't exist in Idaho. We don't have insanity in Idaho. But incompetency relates to her ability now, years later, to assist her attorneys to make decisions as they proceed to trial. Decisions we've even talked about tonight. Should I testify or should I not? How do we cross-examine these witnesses? What can you ask Kay? Tell me some stuff about Kay. Tell me some stuff about Brandon Boudreaux. tell us some stuff as your attorney meeting with the client that can help us prepare this case. And if she's not doing that, then she may be incompetent, and she has in fact found to be incompetent to stand trial. That's different than insanity to commit the offense. And I'm probably going to get my head chopped off by the other lawyers here, but I'm sort of simplifying it a little bit, because that's at its core, that's how we're looking at it in this case.
This is kind of an interesting comment. Obviously a little bit tongue in cheek, but the Reels 360Z, if she truly believed those kids were zombies, then she wouldn't mind seeing those pics because they were super disturbing. Greg, to you, I did a double take when Detective Hermosillo was talking when he executed these search warrants, and some of the things they found: hazmat suits in one place, and then silencers found in the garage. Now, admittedly, I'm a kid from New Jersey and New York City, where guns are not used in the same way as they are in Idaho. But you're from Utah. You hear silencers. Does that give you room for pause there?
Yes, because they're very closely regulated by the federal government. I mean, you and I couldn't buy one very easily. It may be, if at all. But it was also important in light of Brandon's testimony from the day before, because he describes, this Jeep coming up to him with the window rolled down and a barrel of a gun with a silencer on it. At least that's what he thought. I mean, everybody who's looked down the barrel of a gun describes it different than what it might actually be. But he described that, and I think that was the importance of the evidence that was found, because it tended to corroborate what Brandon Boudreaux had said the day before. And talking about the evidence and the things that were found, one of the things that just hit me really hard, like a rock, was if I recall, he said that JJ was bound with duct tape on his mouth and his hands. And I'll just tell you something, that's not something you do to a person who's already dead. And so that really makes this so much more troubling, so much more heinous. And so much, and I think that's the kind of thing that the jury just has to look at and go, whoa. And then, like you're saying, the hazmat suits and the guns, and I mean, everything, every time they open a door, every time they execute a search warrant, they find more things that just lead them to two more directions. I mean, Hermosillo, he was a young guy, had only been on the force there in Rexburg for a short period of time, but I think he did a really good job in this case.
Yeah, kudos to law enforcement. They don't get the credit necessarily. They get beat on a lot, but in this case, it sounds like he did a pretty thorough investigation. This caught my attention also. Detective Hermosillo is talking just before 10 a.m. about the sort of the last proof of life of Tylee Ryan being from September 8th, 2019. A photo of her in Yellowstone, the last date for JJ, September 22nd, 2019. And then when they are executing the search warrant at Chad's property, he says that he noticed that Chad was looking over his shoulder and said he looked where Chad was looking and saw the tree and pond in the backyard area where these bodies were found. I found that like very eerie. He's kind of scoping out the basically where these bodies were buried. And then just before 11 a.m., and this is the part, guys, that's going to get a little difficult to even hear. So I'm warning you, if you're weak or not in the mood to hear something like this, probably best to, watch reruns of Three's Company or something. But 10:54, Detective Hermosillo says when he went over to the tree, Lori, they began to remove the top layer of soil. It exposed 3 large rocks. At that point, there was a strong odor that, through my training, I knew was a decomposing body. That's in news what we call kind of the reveal there. At that point, when this starts to be introduced, did you notice a visible reaction from the jurors or the people in the court, or both?
Yeah, I think the jury was, first of all, they were very attentive. This is, you could tell that they felt like this was why they were supposed to be there. This wasn't just background information. This was the meat. But yeah, they were interested, but you could also see that they were steeling themselves for the fact that this was also going to be the really hard stuff to hear. So yeah, I think on both hands. On one hand, I think they were interested because they knew that that was why they were there, but still kind of stealing themselves a little bit because they had been cautioned in jury selection that there was going to be difficult information and difficult images for them to process.
Yeah, one of the jurors I remember was a Iraqi war veteran. They were worried it might trigger PTSD. He said he would be fine. I have no idea if he was selected. A mother of 5 was also questioned, and she flat out said she could not be impartial, and she was released. So, the jurors, potential jurors, went through a lot of questioning to get to this point. Dr. Pearson, around 11 a.m., Detective Hermosia in court says that police made a slit in this little plastic bag, and there appeared to be human hair. At this point, officers were told Chad was leaving his daughter's house across the street at a high rate of speed. Officers followed Chad, pulled him over, and took him into custody. Obviously, not only accused of these crimes, but then obviously a cowardly act trying to run away. But he goes on here, Dr. Pearson. Hermosia went back to the burial site after Chad was taken into custody, and the small body wrapped in plastic was put in a body bag. And that image to me was just beyond heart-wrenching a little. And there's a kid we shouldn't be talking about this in front of. What's up? What's up, little Anjanette? Welcome to the show. You can say hi. I've got kids that age. You just might want to put earmuffs on them. That's all.
Right. Exactly.
So, Dr. Pearson, he goes back to the site here and sees this little black bag going to a body bag driven off to the morgue. Again, what kind of impact is that going to have on the jurors? I mean, you can't help but have a mental image of that immediately when hearing this.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to create a picture in their mind. That's what you're trying to do as a prosecutor. Is you're telling a story. You're the person who has the burden of proof, and you have to tell a story. You have to create these images in the minds of the jurors so that they understand. Also, you want to be able to get other information in, so you have to lay foundation for the relevancy of that of the other information, and you do that by introducing these little pieces along the way. I think that for example, you say cowardly. People's brains are designed. It's old design, old software, hasn't been updated. At its core, it is functioning on survival, and people react in very strange ways when they are faced with a survival instinct. And so I'm a big fan of process. I love process. Without a trial, the government can just take you away and put you in prison for the rest of your life or kill you. That's why we have process. We valued it so much, we wrote it down twice. So I think that it's important. People can have their opinions about things, but what the prosecution is truly trying to do is to create images in the mind of what happened so that they can lead to the next part of the investigation and the next part of the investigation so that they can establish the necessary elements beyond a reasonable doubt.
Excellent panel tonight, followed by Michelle from South Africa, who writes, I'm starting to think that not allowing cameras in the court was correct and wise. Lori will have to wake up from whatever state she is in one day and realize what she has done. I pity her. Michelle, by the way, is an attorney, I believe. To be clear, if there were cameras in there, they would not be showing these images. Those would be obscured from the public, but still the people inside there. A few more things which are difficult, and then we're going to move to Lori's breakdown from there and get into that a little bit more. But Detective Hermosillo went on, and I was processing this just from looking at these live tweets, and it was really troubling. But he said, these are direct quotes. We started finding burnt flesh, decomposing bones. The smell was so bad we had to take turns digging. Eventually, we uncovered bits and pieces of Tylee, who we assumed was Tylee, that had been burned. There were pieces of bone, charred flesh, just globs of flesh that were falling apart. And he goes on and says it was kind of deformed, and the flesh and bone was all kind of stuffed in that melted bucket. And he says that each detective could only work for a few minutes at a time because the smell was so bad. Police then uncovered a human skull, and they worked to put all the pieces into a body bag. I know my lovely mother is watching, and right now she's saying, stop, you've said enough. Lori, again, I mean, if you have an inkling of a belief that Lori Vallow was involved and you're a juror, could it be over this early in the trial?
I think it's possible. One of the things that Detective Hermosillo said at one point, I want to say it was in the preliminary hearing because I didn't necessarily hear it today. But when they picked JJ's body up, and it was completely wrapped in black plastic and duct tape, he was so small they didn't need a stretcher to take his body to the coroner's van. Somebody just picked it up and held it in their arms. That image was just chilling to me. And then, of course, when they gathered up Tylee, there wasn't enough of her. And so they literally were just holding these children in their arms as they took them to the coroner's van. And I think knowing what we saw about the images, knowing what Greg and I saw in court today, what the jury saw of those things, it has to be beyond troubling to them. If the prosecution is able to, as they say they are, connect Lori and her actions and the substantial step that it takes to show that she was an actor in the children's death, then I think they get there pretty quickly, because I think the jury's already there.
Interesting. KCL writes, Anjanette, I think the zombie thing and religious baloney was a front to justify her being with Chad without the encumbrance of her kids and for having money for nothing. Do you think people agree with that? That she was basically just burdened by these children at the end of the day? She wanted to have this love affair with husband number 5, happy, go lucky ending in Kauai and Hawaii. And the kids were simply in the way. Is that the sense that you're getting, not only from your own take on it, but from viewers who are writing to you and watching Law and Crime?
I think, I think that's very possible. I think that's what most people do think. And I go back and forth on this myself, because I think that if she truly believed that these children were zombies and they were inhabited by zombies, and she was doing something that, she truly believed this was like a service, or she was saving them, or what have you, wouldn't she just come out and say that? But, if she was truly she truly believed that, and she were that mentally ill, wouldn't she just say, I had to do this because they were inhabited by these zombies and this was my belief? And I mean, and just the whole thing about still collecting the Social Security benefits that were meant for the children. It does seem very calculated and really not, even though we know she's mentally ill. If she truly believed this, wouldn't she just come out and say it? I don't know, if she were insane, so to speak. So I go back and forth on it, but it does seem maybe she can still believe this. I mean, maybe she can hold this so-called religious belief about the zombies and Chad's teachings, but still be very calculating at the same time. It both can be maybe possible.
Yeah, and that's an interesting take. If she really was so whacked out, maybe she would just admit to that being the reason as to why she did it. Val says, hi from Mexico. Great panel tonight. Hi from Wales. Love your channel. Greg, to you, and this is how we started with the meltdown seen and heard around the world that everyone is talking about, particularly STS Nation. So this morning we got wind that she was chatty and taking copious notes and talking to her attorneys. But at 12:50 p.m., after a lot of these graphic images we just talked about were presented in court, everything shifts, and court was about to resume 10 minutes before 1. But John Thomas asked for some time to visit with Lori. Lori appears visibly upset. Court is in recess again. Then a few minutes later, Lori has left the courtroom with her attorney to have a discussion in a private hallway. This is from Nate Eaton with East Idaho News. Big shout out to him. Without him, a lot of people wouldn't have the reporting that they would want. And he writes, personal observation. Lori Daybell appeared upset this afternoon. I've seen her in multiple court hearings in Hawaii, face-to-face at the Rexburg airport. I've never seen her upset or sad before today. So, Greg, again, I mean, how significant is this freak out taking place in the court, in front of jurors, in front of the judge?
Well, a lot of it was not necessarily in front of the jury. I think the judge was trying to shield the jury from some of this. Although you're right, there were certain parts of her body language today that the jury couldn't have helped but to have seen, especially the changes during the day. But this thing that happened at 1:30 today was largely out of the presence of the jury, I hope. I mean, at least it seemed that way. And it seemed like the judge was trying to, and the attorneys were trying to figure out what to do about it, because it's an issue we don't deal with when a client in the middle of trial says, "Hey, I'm checking out. You guys, I'll come back tomorrow." I mean, it's not the kind of thing the judge. I'll bet that judge has never dealt with that before. Maybe the lawyers hadn't either. So what do you do? I mean, everybody's looking at the books, going, well, she has a right to be present, but does she have a right to be absent from her own trial? That's not in the Constitution anymore. Let's decide what it is. And I think it was a call the judge had a right to make, and he had some discretion to make. And frankly, I think that he made the right call, that she can't just excuse herself. I also think it was a better call for her, because had she absented herself from the afternoon proceedings, that would have really been bad for her with the jury, in my opinion. I don't know that they could have forgiven her for that. If you're on trial for something, if you didn't do it, let's hear it. Let's stay with the fight. But I mean, she hadn't shown much emotion to the children's pictures before then, and all of a sudden she says, "Hey, I'm out of here. I'll be downstairs in the holding cell. See you tomorrow morning when I have a new jumpsuit on." And that just, the judge was having none of that, to his credit, in my opinion.
Special shout out here to Marcella for becoming a YouTube member. We appreciate that. At 1:35, Lori, since both you and Greg were there, again, Nate writes, I think I'm safe to assume that everyone in the courtroom is wondering what is going on. It's been 30 minutes and no updates. Jurors, as Greg just pointed out, remain outside of the courtroom. They were never brought back in from their lunch break. And then at 1:40, all the attorneys re-enter the courtroom, but Lori is not there. At that point, by the way, that's when Kay Woodcock enters the courtroom too, right at that moment, basically. But again, just take us inside the courtroom, since there's no cameras. How confusing was it, or jolting? And how disjointed was it in those moments where people didn't realize or know what to expect?
Well, I think that the gallery, the jury wasn't there, but certainly the gallery was concerned that something was going on. There were a lot of people who were saying, "Oh, is she going to take a plea?" There was never any credible evidence that was going to happen. But I think there were people that were concerned that was going to happen. When you see that kind of activity, you always wonder, okay, is there a problem with the jury? Is there a problem with the defendant? You start to ask those things. I think it's important to ask or to think about when she came back after the judge made his decision and said, you have to stay. She was angry. And it was hard for me to get a read on whether she was angry that she had to stay and be subjected to those things, or whether she was angry because she didn't like everyone looking at her while she was looking at those images. I almost got the feeling that she didn't want all of those people, including JJ's family, the whole Vallow family's there, watching her react or not to those pictures. I wondered if it was as much about her reaction being scrutinized as it was about how she was going to react.
And Patty David, I pulled this up on purpose. Hello from Syracuse, New York. Best panels always. Love to Joel and Karn. Patty, you don't know this, but a little Joel factoid. I lived in Manlius, New York, a suburb of Syracuse, for like 2 years when my dad was doing his medical training there. And my father thought it would be a good idea to take me to the top of a very big hill to teach me how to ride a bicycle and let me go. And it didn't end very well. I had a banana seat. He was a doctor. He was a smart guy. Maybe didn't have the best street smart. So when I see Syracuse, New York, I fondly remember my baby teeth before they were extracted for me. Lauren Brown writes, do you think Detective Hermosillo's testimony today is the worst of it? Or do you think it will get harder to listen to? It's definitely going to get crazier. I'm looking forward to some details. Lori, I'll defer back to you on this one since you know the case so intimately, and I'll get to Dr. Pearson.
I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet. Remember, we have not heard from the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Tammy. And so I think we're in for some more hard stuff. I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet.
Well, that does not bode well. Thank you to Jennifer. Love hearing from the good Lori and panel. Dr. Pearson, to you. So finally, this mystery ends at 1:45 p.m. and Lori re-enters the courtroom. She's described as having a red face and appears to have been crying. The deputy, as if that's not bad enough for her, is then locking her leg shackles into the ground. A little more humiliation there. She sits down and is looking down. Her mood is visibly different. This morning, she was chatting with her attorney, smiling and laughing. This afternoon, she is silent and appears upset. And that's when Jim Archibald says Lori wishes to waive her right to not be present for the remainder of the afternoon. He says it was emotional this morning, and Lori, quote unquote, has fragile mental health. And then obviously a debate was triggered from there, with the judge ultimately deciding she has to stay. But I was magnetized to this phrase that she has fragile mental health, and that's what I was kind of getting at the beginning, that maybe Jim Archibald is positioning or poised to let the court know that maybe she can no longer stand trial. Maybe she's not competent. Do you see any of that?
If you thought your client was not competent to stand trial, you have an ethical obligation to inform the court directly that your client is not competent to stand trial. So if he thought that, he would tell the judge in a private sidebar with the prosecutor there. I think that, and I'm careful here. It's not a ploy. He has a job to do. But the judge was screwed either way here. If he absented her from the trial, then it would trigger an appeal later on, potentially. If he didn't do so, then it'll trigger an appeal, because the argument will be that the jury was influenced by the mental health as demonstrated through the physical reaction to things. And the court has it's not constructive knowledge, has actual knowledge that this person has struggled with mental health for a very long time because this has taken so long to come to trial and because of her competency issue. So I think that what the lawyer was doing was laying the grounds for an appeal, which is what his job is, but also to signal to the judge that you know, to make a persuasive argument, to signal to the judge that his client wants to not be there, and let's let her go. I happen to disagree. I think that the judge should have. They know where she is. They've got her. So it's not an issue of will she show up to trial? Will she appear? You can be tried in absentia. We all heard with Donald Trump that if you don't show up, you'll be tried in absentia. And so it's important to understand that it's her right to have this trial. It's her right to be present. And she is not guilty at this point. She is innocent until proven guilty. She may very well have done it. Maybe she did. It seems like she did, right? But it's her right to be there or not be there. And it isn't a punishment, is my point. A trial is not a punishment. A trial is a process that is given to the defendant based on our Constitution.
If I was Lori, I'd call Dr. P and say, hey, I need a defense attorney. Linda J writes, do you think the enormity of all the deaths has finally sunk into Lori? She wants to avoid hearing about the horrific treatment of her kids. And Jeanette, you're a mother. Do you think there's anything to this comment from Linda?
There may be, but I was kind of just thinking to myself, and I feel that, you know, Lori Hellis, as somebody who's been following this case since the beginning, may know better than I. Maybe Lori Vallow Daybell just wants to be in control and wants to be able to say, I don't want to be here when I don't want to be here. Maybe the images were upsetting to her to a degree, and maybe she just wants to call the shots. It seems to me, from my kind of reviewing this case, she's somebody who feels that she gets what she wants most of the time, and does what she needs to do to get what she wants. She's not getting what she wants in this respect, as far as not being allowed to leave the courtroom. So maybe the images are bothering her. Maybe she simply feels like I shouldn't have to sit here and look at this. You know, I there may be some of that. I don't know. I'm not in the courtroom yet, but that's just kind of what I was sitting here wondering. Maybe the images are bothering her a bit, but also maybe she just wants to be able to say, if I don't want to be here, I shouldn't have to be here.
And my mother, who's a therapist, has a clinical diagnosis for what you just described, and she calls it being a spoiled brat, which she calls me that to my face many times. Laura writes here, question for good Lori, and we're going to start to we'll start to wrap it up. I can't believe how quickly this time is going, but it is. Question for good Lori. Were you able to see John Pryor, that is Chad Daybell's attorney's, facial expressions in court today? STS Nation honing in right now.
John Pryor has been in court every day. He was in court for most of the time during jury selection, and he's been there every day. And I've actually chatted with him a couple of times about inconsequential things. But I was not able to see his facial expressions during the actual trial times, and while Lori was doing her stuff. He was behind me and on the other side of the room, so was not able. He is wanted these cases severed from the beginning, so he is very happy that they're being tried separately, and he has some very strong opinions about the way the case is being handled at this point.
Misunderstood. Hello from a Connecticut STS addict. Those are the best addicts. We like that. Better than crack or fentanyl. So stay with a STS. And then we've got Rekev P, love Greg watching in Utah. What's not to love about Greg? So Greg, speaking of that, and you alluded to this and a few others did, at 2:39, and I promise you we're going to wrap momentarily. During previous breaks, Lori has smiled and laughed with her attorneys. This break, she is quiet and stoic, and then later she's described as scowling. And Greg, I think you said it. We saw the many faces of Lori Vallow Daybell, and if you were her defense attorney, what would you say to her after court today? And you think she'd listen to a word you were saying, or just stare right through you?
I would say, knock it the heck off. I mean, I really think somebody's got to get her attention a little bit. And I thought they had done a pretty good job of that early on. And I'm not blaming the attorneys at all. I mean, you've got to work with what you've got. But she needs to sit up. She needs to act appropriately. She needs to look at the jury. She needs to look at the evidence. She needs to pay attention. And I think her attorneys need to tell her, Lori, those jurors are watching you all day. You can't do this. You can't play games. And you can't be the little pout that you were today. And well, she didn't get what she wanted, so she comes back in and she's all mad and finally just caves in at the end of the day and closes her eyes. I mean, I think that she can be a sympathetic person. I mean, Kay Woodcock paints her as a good mother. I mean, I think you've got to paint her as this humanized person, and she did herself no favors today by checking out and not wanting to be a part of it. I also think, and I don't know whether attorneys bought into this, I think she felt that she was going to get what she wanted, that she was going to be excused for the afternoon. And when she wasn't, maybe her attorneys even told her, yeah, this shouldn't be a problem. We'll just go tell the judge. I don't know that everybody expected what the judge ruled, and that may have been a problem for several people today.
Amy Hart writes, hi from Pensacola, Florida, in the Panhandle. She put these families through this. She needs to face what she did. Poor babies, not poor Lori. Followed by, Lori doesn't want to see the consequences of her action. I'm sure it's hard on her, just as it's hard on the judge, jury, and other observers. That shows her sanity has been restored. Hello from Tennessee. I'm so surprised by these defense opening statements. And then I got to put this one up. Tom Crossan, the king of Staten Island, in the house. Father Capodanno Drive. I have friends that went to Monsignor Farrell. Staten Island is one of the best places to go and people watch. It's a interesting group of people there. I think I'm saying that in a proper way. Anjanette Levy. She is a correspondent and the host for the Law & Crime Network. She's covered a number of high-profile cases, most recently the Alec Murdaugh trial. She covered Stephen Avery, trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, and former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. So, Anjanette, when do you take off for Boise, and what's your plan there in terms of covering the trial? Are you going to be in court, or obviously trying to get a seat in court every day, I would assume?
Yeah, I guess, I'll be leaving Sunday morning and trying my hardest to win the lottery, as they say, over there in Boise, as far as getting a seat in the courtroom. I mean, obviously I would prefer to be in there. If I have to go to the overflow, that's fine too, as long as I get a seat.
Dr. Tracy Pearson, kind enough to come today on the show. She's got another program right after this. She's a lawyer. She brings 2 decades or more of experience defending complex legal matters on behalf of litigants in state and federal court. She's been on Dr. Phil. She's about to be on John Fugelsang's Tell Me Everything on Sirius XM Progress 127. But she told me privately STS is her favorite show. She just can't tell John that. But Squeaky Wheel says, Lori has to sit and hear the horrific details behind the burial and discovery of the kids' bodies, and she asked to take the day off and go sit in her cell. No way. Sit there and listen, psycho mom. Again, to you, Dr. Pearson, is it, in your estimation, game over already that these members of STS Nation are very similar potentially to the jurors, and is it already over maybe?
You know, Ann Jeanette and I have been on air a lot together, and we've covered these cases on another network. And I have to say that I don't predict, and she knows this. I do not predict because it can go either way. And a good example of that would be the Nicholas Cruz case, where if you had sat through that trial and for that death penalty case, if you had sat through that and heard the sounds and seen the things, I don't know how they ended up with what they ended up with, but anything is possible. And so I don't know if the defense has a rabbit to pull out of its hat. I don't know if the prosecution's case is going to go south on them. I don't know if a witness is going to mess up. I do think it was interesting, the two witnesses that they called, Kay and Brendan, because it seemed like there were some bad facts that they were trying to hide. Some things about Gmail accounts, some things about the fact that that he might have an axe to grind against Lori because of his former marriage to Lori's, I think, niece. And so I think that this is a good case for the prosecution, but it doesn't mean it's perfect.
Kathleen writes, Joel, your guests each night on this trial make up for the trial not being broadcast. Thank you, from the Oregon coast. His name is Greg Scordis, and he's now a friend of the show. And hopefully will come back once again, even though he offered to come back last night, and I had him back the very next day. He probably didn't appreciate that, but he was the Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He's been practicing law since 1982, even though he looks 37. He's an avid cyclist. He's got grandchildren, an all-around great guy. And there was a follow-up. This was it, Greg, right here. Just wanted you to comment as you provide your closing arguments. Cindy writes, maybe the gravity of the situation is finally dawning on her. Do you concur with that or no?
Yeah, but that could also be something that helps her. I mean, the state's put on a lot of evidence already that this was a gruesome act, but they haven't put on too much that says Lori did it or participated in it. And so I have to keep going back to Dr. Pearson saying, she's still presumed innocent, and the state's got to tie her in. And the jury wants that because they don't like her. They don't like Lori. They don't like her at all right now. And neither does half the people, or 90% of the people that are watching your show tonight. But they still got to tie her to the crime. And that's going to be the hard part for the state to do.
Spoken like a true defense attorney. Diane O'Brien, thank you for the super sticker. Ann Vroom, a friend of the show. Last time I saw Lori V get a comeuppance was when that judge in Hawaii set her bail at $2 million and approved extradition back to Idaho. She didn't see that coming and showed it. Her name is Good Lori, not to be confused with Bad Lori. Lori Hellis is an author and a retired criminal defense attorney who has a blog, The Lori Vallow Story, and is currently writing a book. The title again, Lori, the title of the book?
Children of Darkness and Light.
Children of Darkness and Light. And it will also be the name of her YouTube channel.
Right.
So check that out. And she picked up and left beautiful Arizona to go to beautiful Boise, Idaho, which is a little colder. And as I said, she's writing a book, and she's there to try to figure out what is going on with this case. Lori, are you any closer to answering that right now?
Not yet. There's a lot more to know about this case, but that's what fascinated me about it to begin with, was the number of layers that were involved in it.
And I saw that you said you're not really going to be tweeting as much because you're taking notes. And as a guy who's writing a book myself, I'm curious, what sorts of things are you looking at now for your book as you're watching this trial play out?
Well, there's a fair amount of the information that's coming out that we already knew, but I'm more interested in the reactions of the people and the body language of the people who are there, what the jury looks intently at. So I'm studying more about the people in the room right now than I am about the actual facts of the case, because most of that at this point I've heard. So we haven't gotten into things that I haven't heard yet.
Thank you all for coming on. A quick programming note. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, live, Jessica Bublitz. She is a Boise defense attorney. She was on yesterday. She's fantastic. Tara Malik, a Boise defense attorney. Fantastic. She's coming back. And Jean Fisher, one of the longest serving prosecutors in Ada County. She'll be here as well. So another powerhouse panel. I teased the fact that we're going to have some female ex-cons. We did that with Alec Murdoch. Well, we're going to do that this Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to talk about what it's like in that Ada County jail. People were asking about her makeup and her hair curls, and also what it could be like for her if she's convicted and goes to a state penitentiary. And my dear mother will be making her comeback after the loss of the love of her life. She will be here this Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And then, of course, Friday, 12:30, we've got Great Scott. It's your True Crime Phil with Scott Duffy and Detective Phil Waters. Until then, my homage to Geraldo Rivera. Love you, America. Love you, Boise. Love you, Utah. Love you, California and Maine. Anjanette, where are you?
Cincinnati.
Love you, Cincinnati. You cannot leave out.
Reds.
You cannot leave out Cincinnati. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you, everyone. Panel can stick around for a second.
Good night.
Did that wrong. Faked everything.